Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today I have literally just wrapped up in the garage after a bit of a session installing the engine electrics on my BMW R100CS. So I thought I'd quickly get the camera on and just talk you through what I've done, where it's all at, and what's coming next in this build project. So you might remember a previous video where I had all this stuff on my desk and was giving it a little bit of a service. So I cleaned up the rotor, made sure these slip rings are in good condition, checked the back of the taper fit on the rotor, also replaced the brushes on the alternator, two little carbon brushes that sit up against these copper slip rings. And I cleaned up all the stator and replaced all of the associated wiring that connects it to the rectifier up here. So installing this onto the bike, pretty straightforward, pretty simple procedure, but a couple of things to be aware of. The main thing is when you're installing the rotor is that this is an interference fit with the nose on the crankshaft. Now that taper provides a huge amount of mechanical grip if the two surfaces are nice and clean. So that means cleaning the inside of the rotor taper and the crankshaft nose itself. When I first put the rotor on, clearly it wasn't quite clean enough because I was able to spin the rotor on the crank nose quite easily, just kind of slips around. So I took it all off, squirted it with a bit of brake cleaner, gave it a bit of a rub down with a cloth, and then put it back on, a couple of very light taps with a rubber mallet, and it's absolutely rock solid. It's properly gripped on there. So that's exactly what we want to see. Then go ahead and tighten up this bolt here on the rotor nose. And I put probably about 18 Newton meters of torque through this, and not too tight on there, but just tight enough. Then once you've done that, you can go ahead and you can install the stator cover. And to do that, there's just 3 bolts that go in here in that kind of triangle pattern, there, there, and there. And not a massive amount of torque on these, probably about 5 Newton meters of torque, but just making sure you do it kind of sequentially so that it's going on nice and square. And that enables obviously the rotor to spin inside there because there's not a lot of clearance between the rotor and the magnets on the stator. So you've got to make sure that's nice and square so that it spins freely. Pretty straightforward. And then kind of moved on to just wiring it all up. The diode board, I installed that first, obviously. And to do that, very simple, was 4 bolts, 1, 2, and then another couple up there. You can just see that one there and another one there. Thing to remember with the diode board is these top 2 terminals have to be grounded to the engine block. And to do that, you'll see, I'll give you something to point with, there is a cap head bolt just in there. You can see a little brown wire coming off of it. So that's where that top bolt there on the rectifier is grounded through the inner timing cover and into the engine block via that bolt. Then exactly the same on the other side. You can see that cap head bolt there with a little brown wire coming off it. That runs up into the back of the diode board connected to this top terminal here. So it's these 2 top ones that are grounded. These 2 are insulated and are not grounded. I've also just created another wire that comes down here and another one down here from either side, and then just kind of screws into the inner timing cover there. And what I might do, just before I do the cover up, is make another wire, just bolt it on with an M6 there, and then bolt it to the engine case there via that bolt there, which currently isn't doing anything because I've got a new style starter motor. So that bolt there could be used just to pin another earth cable between the timing chest and the engine block, just for belt and braces. So as I said, all the wiring that runs between the diode board and the alternator is new, and I'll quickly walk you through what all that does. So we've got 3 phases of AC current that run out from the alternator. So this creates a wave at 120 degree increments of AC power, and it's in 3 phases. So those 3 phases come out of these spades here and then plug into the back of the diode board up there. So my kind of routing goes round there and then through the back, kind of round, and you can see the three wires just poking out there before they go up into the back of the diode board block. And my routing here is really just to make sure that there is loads of clearance between this little bit here on the timing case, if your wires are kind of poking out into this, then you might chop them when you put the cover on, because that mates up against that surface there. So you want to watch out for that. Then on the other side, you've got the Y terminal, which is basically the other side of this circuit that then runs up into to my left-hand side on the diode board up there. And then on my right-hand side, we've got this red cable that runs out of the diode board, and that, ignore this one for now. And then that runs up into the starter motor here. So that's that smaller ring terminal there. And what that is, that's our AC power, which has been rectified by the diode board, and it kind of comes out and then effectively connects to the battery via that terminal on the starter motor, because we've also got our battery positive wire, this thick wire here, which connects to the positive side of the battery. So that's how we get charge back to the bike. Now, keeping everything all under control, this plug here connects to our regulator. So from the regulator, we get power that comes out via this black wire and then hits this front-facing brush here. And obviously that then connects to the rotor via this copper ring. And the amount of power that's sent into this is regulated by the regulator, and that determines how strong the magnetic field is going to be around that rotor, which in turn determines how much AC current is created by the alternator, and therefore how much power ends up coming back into the bike. The brown wire here is for the second brush, which runs behind the first one here, just in the back. So that's our kind of grounded brush that runs in through that terminal there. Then we have over on this side, this plug here. This black wire runs into a little spade on the starter solenoid, and that comes from the ignition trigger from the starter relay. Sorry, so that kind of allows the solenoid to turn over when it gets that kind of trigger signal from the starter relay. And then these blue wires run up we've got one that connects into the back of the diode board, and these run up to, I believe, to the charge light on the bike as well. So that's how it all works, roughly. The bean can, or the electronic ignition timer, sits down here, and this has got a wire that runs up on the left-hand side of the alternator, up through here, up through this little spade connector here, this little connector block here. It's not a spade connector block, is it? Anyway, and then that terminates up into this guy, which runs into our ignition control unit, which eventually will sit up here above the brake line splitter. So that's the basics of the engine wiring. So that's all done. I've also installed the crankcase rebreather hose, which goes into the back of the airbox, and that's it. All pretty straightforward. The only thing that I've noticed is I see a lot of guys turning over their engines using a little Allen key in here like this, and they're able to kind of turn their engine over. Now that I've got everything installed, I can't turn my engine over without putting quite a lot of force through this, so I'm hoping that everything's okay. It should be fine. But this engine, as I said, is brand new, only just been rebuilt. It's currently got no oil in it, so the piston rings are going to be really tight. Everything's going to be really tight on it, so I'm not overly worried. But it is, of course, just worth making sure that your rotor is not kind of binding up against your stator windings or anything like that. So when I get the back wheel on it and I can put it in gear, I'll turn it all over, make sure everything's rotating properly before we attempt to kind of start the bike up. But yeah, it should be absolutely fine, fingers crossed. Anyway, all I've got to do now is just bolt up the covers, and we can move on to the next job, which will probably be suspension, front suspension. And then we can go ahead and get the swing arm on, the subframe and the suspension and the rear wheel on, and it should start looking a little bit like a motorbike again. Fingers crossed. Anyway, Thank you very much for watching. Until the next one, ride safe.